In section 10.2, we're going to look at some of the evidence for evolution. We've looked a little bit at some fossils in the past in this course, and we'll do a little bit now. We'll also explain how evidence from living species gives us clues about evolution, and we'll look at a concept called biogeography and how that relates to evolutionary changes. So the fossils are like windows into the past. They provide a clear evidence that evolution has occurred. Scientists who study fossils are called paleontologists. So let's take a look at one example, and that's the horse. Let's take a look at this diagram that's from your textbook. And right here, believe it or not, ancestors of the horses were about the size of a present-day fox. And what happened over a few million years, take a look at this. This is how tall a horse is, 1.6 meters, but they were only about 0.4 meters. But what they're showing you is how the molar teeth evolved over time as we follow the fossil record, but also their forefoot changed from having 4 separate bones to then 3, and then finally 1 separate bone. And we can see this all through the fossil record. We have another example at the end of this section, which is a wonderful science animation, which is about whales that I think you will really like. Another place that we can see it in present-day animals is in the idea of comparative anatomy, where we study similarities and differences in the structure of different species. Homologous structures are structures that are similar in related organisms that they inherited from a common ancestor. So let's take a look at the hands of 5 different animals. Notice our arm, 1 bone, 2 bones, wrist bones, hand bones, finger bones. Then let's take a look over here at the right-hand side of a cat. 1 bone, 2 bones, same. Let's take a look at the whale. 1 bone, 2 bones, wrist bones. Let's take a look at the bat. Same kind of thing. This is called comparative anatomy, and that means they all have a similar basic bone structure, that they have all evolved distantly back in time from the same relative. Another thing that people find interesting is that there's evidence in embryos, embryological evidence of evolution. For example, did you know that fish and reptiles, while they're in the embryo, have a tail? That's not surprising. And that they have gills? Not surprising. But for a period of time, birds and humans' embryos also have gills and a tail for a period of time in the embryo, and then they go away as the embryo develops. There's also something called vestigial structures, and these have been reduced in size over time if the structures already or is no longer being used. For example, human beings have a tailbone. It's still there, but it's gone down way in size, but we still have a remnant of that bone. And we also can have evidence of evolution by comparing DNA. And Darwin could not do that. He only looked at the anatomy and embryos of living things. But scientists today can compare their DNA. And there's strong evidence for a common ancestor when you look closely at their DNA. For example, take a look at this cladogram. One of the biggest misconceptions in evolution is that human beings evolved from chimpanzees. Not true. Another misconception, human beings evolved from gorillas. Not true. But what a cladogram shows us is that human beings and chimpanzees shared a common relative way back in time. So millions of years ago, human beings and chimpanzees shared a common relative. But so did humans, chimpanzees, and gorilla further back in time. And even further back in time down here, these 4 primates, humans, chimpanzees, gorillas, baboons, all had a common ancestor. Biogeography is another concept that helps support evolution, and today the camel family includes different types of camels. And they're shown in this figure 1011. All of today's camels are descended from the same camel ancestors. But watch what happened. How now they live in different parts of the world. And they started and moved all across the globe. But watch what's happened to their shape as they evolved over time. The geography helped shape these animals. Darwin's finches are the same thing, the Galapagos finches, different beak size shape depending on the type of food that they eat. This was one of the big discoveries, and actually another misconception is that Darwin discovered this. It actually wasn't true. He sent all the finches back from the Galapagos, but it was the ornithologist at a British Science Museum that showed him that. His name was William Gould. Another thing that I'd like you to take a look at is, many years ago, we believed that evolution of bigger animals would take place very, very slow, like maybe over millions of years. But there were two biologists who were studying in the 1970s in the Galapagos Islands. Their name were the Grants, and they discovered that even when there was a slight decrease in the environment, there was they noticed, for example, take a look at this. Here's beak size right here, and the year was 1976. Well, there was a drought for the next 2 years, from 76, 77 into 78, and when they measured, all of a sudden, I shouldn't say all of a sudden, it was a couple years later, but the beaks of the surviving birds did become larger. So we can see evolution in action. So for our lesson summary, remember that fossils provide a window to the past. They're evidence for evolution. And that scientists study anatomy, they compare embryos, and they compare the DNA of living things to understand how they evolved. And biogeography is also a way that we can study the evidence for evolution. On this next slide, we have a video that's really well done. What is the evidence for evolution? It comes from a YouTube channel called Stated Clearly. I have this linked in the video description. Please take a look at that, and I'll also put a link right up here in the upper right. There'll be an eye where you can click and go out and see that. That particular channel is called Stated Clearly. It's a great channel for genetics and evolution, a great place to explore. So in this chapter 10.1 and 10.2 is all that I'd like you to read and study, and the quiz questions will come from those two sections. You don't have to read 10.3 and 10.4. Good luck on the quiz, everyone, and we'll see you soon.